What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fed Up Church. I'm Pastor Shaun Finney, and I'm going to be digging into Ecclesiastes Chapter 10 today. So, Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon, wisest man who ever lived, and he titled it Preacher, what translates as Preacher, Ecclesiastes. And we're going to be learning a little bit more from where we left off in Chapter 9, where he said, one sinner destroys much good. And we'll start to see what he means by that, and what's the practical application of this. Now, I'll be reading from the New International Version today. I don't care what version of Bible you use. I really don't. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't care. There's not a perfect translation out there. So, whatever translation you use, that's a good translation, because at least you're using it, right? So blow the dust off. Let's dig in and see what he has to say. And if you're new here, welcome. This is not your stereotypical standard church or organizational church kind of setup to where you're going to hear a lot of doctrines and commandments of men. I don't care about that crap. I'm not studying that. I'm not teaching that, and I'm not indoctrinating you in something that's not in the Bible. Let's roll. What's going on, guys? All right, let's dig into Ecclesiastes Chapter 10. I'm going to read from the New International Version this week. Now, understand, I was reading through the New International Version, English Standard Version, King James Version, New King James Version, every possible version, trying to make sense of what Solomon is trying to teach us in this chapter. And the New International Version is one of the good translations I have found that tends to be accurate to the Hebrew, to the Greek. So ESV is a great version as well. And sometimes King James nails it. And there's a verse in here where King James nailed it on the head better than anyone else. So we'll get to that in a second, but in the meantime, flip over to Ecclesiastes chapter 10, and we're going to pick up in verse 1. It says, as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Solomon. What? Okay, so I actually started doing some research into this, trying to understand exactly what he's talking about, because we don't have flies, dead flies in perfume today. At least I hope not. But trying to understand where that came from. Obviously, it's a common enough problem that he could use this as an example when he's preaching and everyone knows what he's talking about. Now, that being said, I actually started doing some research into... Is the door shut? Perks of running a podcast from your kitchen. So I started trying to understand exactly what Solomon is talking about. Why is this such a common problem if he's able to use it and everyone understands what he's talking about? In order to understand that, I had to understand what was perfume made of in Solomon's time. And the Egyptians nailed it. The Egyptians had this entire process down. They were the original inventors of perfumes. And they mastered it for thousands of years. They were known as the ultimate place to go get perfumes and spices. And I understand now why the Israelites are I don't want to leave. Let me just go back to where there's spices and herbs. People in the wilderness stink. But what interested me most was what they put in it, what it's made out of. So they put, of course, plant matter. Plant matter, you expect some plant extracts, but they also put things in it that were extracted from animals, animal feces, musk, different gland secretions, and they would mix that all in with a touch of flowery floral scents and stuff like that, and it made a very complicated, very complex scent that had a depth to it that intrigued people, made you want to come back for more. So serves its purpose. But the problem with that is you put anything from a dead animal into a bottle, you're going to attract some flies. So if it wasn't properly sealed or it wasn't taken care of, and technically what it's saying here in the Hebrew is that the apothecary oil, so where they mix it. So you put a bunch of dead animal matter, it's going to attract flies. Now, Dead flies, once they would get in, could ruin an entire batch of perfume. And this stuff took ridiculous amounts of preparation, and the method and procedure to creating it was so thorough that for thousands of years we've tried to replicate it and recreate it. And there's all kinds of theories as to exactly how it was done, and they've actually found some of these perfumes, like in Pharaoh's tombs, right? Tutankhamun, they found a vial that was unopened because they believed in order to enter the afterlife you had to smell good and look good and be clean and presentable, or they wouldn't let you in. Go figure. But sounds like a lot of churches. Anyway, they have tried to replicate it, but the point is flies would get in, they would die, and then it only took a few, and it would just spoil the entire batch. Now you're talking a massive loss in profit, a massive amount of money just gone. And then they'd have to start this process all over again, and sometimes they would take months to make it. It's like making, I guess, like an aged barrel of whiskey. It takes months, if not years, to do it and do it correctly, to get that note that you're looking for. So he goes on, and he's saying that as dead flies give perfume a bad smell, so a little folly, foolishness, outweighs wisdom and honor. So the one thing I picked up from that little side note study that I ended up getting into was, if only a few flies can ruin an entire batch, what is Solomon trying to teach me here? And what I came away with was, apparently even the little things have consequences. Even the little details matter. And if you're a man that is known for wisdom and honor and reputation, it doesn't take but one foolish decision to burn it all down and taint that entire reputation moving forward. The other thing that I noticed was he's comparing reputation to perfume. And if he's comparing reputation to perfume, that tells me that character is something we should be able to smell. In other words, we should be able to quickly identify it in whoever we're dealing with. And if we're not identifying it, then something's up. We're dead to our instincts and we're not paying attention. But if we pay attention, we can almost instantly judge a character of somebody. And typically this judgment takes place in less than a few seconds. They've done studies, and we make snap judgments about people within milliseconds of meeting them based on all the sensory information we're taking in. And Solomon is saying their character, whether it be good, wise, or foolish, should be part of that assessment that you can detect pretty quickly. And he says the heart of the wise, in verse 2, inclines to the right. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, where we tend to the right if we're wise. But the heart of the fool to the left. A lot of people understand, like, okay, yes, in the Bible, Old Testament, we're talking the right hand means power and strength because it's your right hand, right? And the majority of people are right-handed. There's no secret in that. So it symbolized dexterity, power, strength, authority, the right hand. But interestingly enough, right, the majority of people are right-handed, and they use the symbolism to refer to dexterity, what you're skillful with. He says the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left. What did the left signify then? Sorry, you left-handed folks out there. The left, okay, literally, best way I can put this, the Latin word sinister means left. Sinister is a Latin word, and it means left. So that tells me that there's more to what we think going on here. The right and the left, it had more to do with just skill and dexterity and power and authority. It had everything to do with moral character. And Solomon is saying the heart of a wise man inclines to those things of high moral character, whereas the heart of a fool inclines to those things completely devoid of any kind of morality. That makes sense, and that's in line with everything he's been saying up to this point. This is in line with what we see in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. He says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. This idea of whether you're foolish or wise, everything's coming from your heart. So if you're trying to do things with a good heart, typically you're going to see that wise outcomes, or at least you're going to see that wisdom in somebody. But if you're inclined to the left, to sinister, more malicious intent, then we're going to see that bleed through in your character, regardless of how good you mask it. And this is something that even Jesus said, when Jesus said, wisdom is justified of all her children. Eventually, it all comes out. Whether you intended something for good or you intended something to be harmful, it all comes out and it's exposed, right? There's nothing hidden in darkness. Everything comes to the light. So, he says in verse 3, even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense, and show everyone how stupid they are.
I have absolutely no idea what's going on.
Even as fools walk on the road, they lack sense. And it's true, right? And this, what Solomon's getting at here is they lack a sense of direction. They don't even have that. Fools who are doing things for completely immoral reasons, trying to self-serve, self-gratification, self-centeredness, conceit, you name it. That those are inclined to the left kind of, words. But he's saying that if we're inclined to the left, we're a fool. And even a fool in the road tells everybody how stupid they are. Now, how do you tell somebody how stupid you are in the road? If you've ever been driving down the interstate, and I hear it in every city I go to. I've traveled around all over the country, and you hear the same thing no matter where you're at. Like, oh, you're from where? Oh, that's awesome. People around here can't drive. They're all idiots. I've heard that everywhere. Which leaves me with one conclusion to draw. Right? Even in the road, fools lack sense. And they tell everyone how stupid they are. You can see it. It's visible. They don't know how to use a turn signal. So anyway, in verse 4, Solomon continues on saying, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. And I have seen this play out personally. So anecdotal evidence, sure, but my personal experience confirms and validates what Solomon's been saying here. If whoever is in authority over you, a ruler, a boss, a manager, whatever, if their anger rises up against you, the best thing you can do is to not leave your post. Don't abandon ship. Don't jump and run and flee when things get difficult. That is not going to end well, right? That just will further enrage whoever is in authority over you. But if you stay at your post and you keep doing your duties, you keep upholding your end of the deal, your responsibilities, and instead you approach it with calmness, the fire goes out. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. Even in a difficult situation, don't leave your post. No matter what situation you're in, running away is never the answer. Deciding to leave may be the answer, but running away is not. One of the best things I've ever learned as a young adult was to respond, not react, to whatever happens around you, but to remain calm. And no matter what comes your way, reactions are involuntary. Reactions are involuntary. Reactions are just spur of the moment, how your brain processes everything emotionally, and however you react, it's how you react. But learning to guard that. The cat running around behind me. Perks of running a podcast from your kitchen. Learning to guard your heart, right? As he says in Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. Guarding your heart means that you're going to watch how you react to situations. And your first reaction becomes a pause, learning to just stop. Pause for a few seconds. It takes a few seconds. Again, this is... When I understood this about how the human brain works, it changed everything. Emotion is like broadband internet, and then you've got logic and reason, which are more like dial-up in the 90s. It takes a few seconds or minutes or sometimes even hours for the logic and reason portion of your brain to process everything that just happened, for you to logically respond to something, versus emotional reactions. Those are fight or flight responses. So something happens, your brain's first thing is to fear, anger, anxiety, run, and it's fight or flight. So that doesn't help you if it's not a life or death situation, and instead it's a performance review at work, or what have you. Reacting like that only further digs the other person's heels in, and instead remaining calm, not abandoning your post, and then responding versus reacting. That can lay a lot of great offenses to rest, especially if you made a mistake. If you made a mistake, just own it. Just own up to it. My goodness, so many people today. Like, I don't understand where this idea comes from, and I understand it's a place of emotional maturity that not a lot of people get to, and we make the mistake of thinking just because we got older, we grew up, and a lot of people got bigger, but they never grew up. And you see this a lot if you ever have a conversation with somebody where, yes, it was their fault, they were in the wrong, and you're pointing this out and how they can change it and do it differently. If you've ever managed anyone in the past, you know what I'm talking about. If they refuse to own their mistake, they can't learn from that mistake. So if you make a mistake, own it. Ownership changes everything. If we can get past the point of who's at fault, because really we don't care. Yes, I did this. Yes, it's my fault. Okay, how can I fix this moving forward? Apologize for it. We'll do it again. Move on. It's not difficult. And that way, we can be done with the conversation. But as soon as you start denying responsibility and ownership of any mistake, my goodness, that conversation is going to take 3 times longer now. Nobody's happy. Own your mistakes. That being said, he says in verse 5, there is an evil that I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. There is an evil. Remember, we talked about this last week too. The word evil simply means harm. Now, if he's saying there's something harmful that I've identified under the sun, because the entire book is the under the sun premise that Solomon's preaching from. Not the above the sun, right? Not heavenly, nothing. He hasn't really talked about that much at all. He's saying under the sun, what you can see as a man of science. Here's what I've seen is harmful. And this one stems from, remember we talked about ownership. The error of a ruler. Interesting that he would say this, right? Because what is King Solomon? He's a ruler. This is Solomon showing a mark of emotional maturity, right? I've seen this under the sun, this great harm befall people, and this is his way of tiptoeing around it and saying, this is how I screwed up. He says that in verse 6, fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. Fools are put in many high positions. And the rich, wait, what? How can you compare wealth, like riches, with wisdom, right? Because he's already said money's not like what it's all about. But he does say that wisdom is like riches, wisdom is like wealth, right? So this had me thinking, I don't think he's talking about like actual riches. The way you and I would say this today is, I have seen a lot of stupid people in positions of leadership, and the people underneath them are the only ones with any common sense. the intelligent people were on the bottom and the idiots were on the top, right? You hear this kind of stuff everywhere you go, every work environment you're in. You're going to hear these kind of discussions around the break room cooler, But he says this I've seen as an error that comes from a ruler, from a king, where people are put in positions of power who shouldn't be there, and the people underneath them are rich in common sense, like rich, like they have an idea of how things should actually run, and they would probably do what's best for the people. But the people that he put in positions of power, they only existed in that role to serve themselves. We see the same thing in politics today. How else do you go into politics broke and come out a millionaire? It's not by serving the people's best interest. I can tell you that. So salaries are public. We know how much you get paid. You're not coming out of there making millions doing things the right way. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. Right, left, doesn't matter. They're both corrupt. Right wing, left wing, same dysfunctional bird. So Solomon's going on saying, the evil I've seen is that you have fools put in positions of power. The rich occupy the low ones. I've seen slaves on horseback while princes go on foot like slaves, right? Not everything in life's not going to be fair. We know that. But we all look and wonder, like, how did that person get there, right? And that reminded me of something I learned in business, and it was the Peter principle. Now, understand, this is my favorite principle. I have used this principle leading others. I've referred back to it many times. But the entire thing, which was created by Lawrence J. Peter and written in a book that he called The Peter Principle in 1969 as a satire. It was meant to be satirical. The whole idea caught on. And it's now like one of the truest examples of hierarchical leadership you're going to see. Anytime you have a hierarchy at work and organization, you tend to see this Peter Principle in action. The Peter Principle states that in a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. He exists as an entry-level employee, and he's great. Amazing skills, hard work ethic. So he gets promoted to a position of higher responsibility in different tasks that require a different set of skills. And say he does great. So he gets promoted again into another position of much more responsibility and much higher leadership and completely different set of skills. And he does decent at it, and then he gets promoted again. And now he's in charge of the division or whatever. And that takes an entirely, completely different set of skills to manage a large organization than it did to be an entry-level employee. And now he's in a position where he doesn't have the skills. His skill set does not match the responsibilities he has. He can't execute them anymore. He's no longer that star employee. And when that's the case, he has now risen to his level of incompetence. So it may have been satirical based on what Lawrence Peter saw in 1969, which is the same thing we see today everywhere. I mean, things don't really change just because time goes by, right? But the Peter Principle caught on, and organizations actually started changing like how they promote and how they hire and how they decide who gets to stay and who gets fired and everything based on this satire, this Peter Principle. And because it's freaking valid. You can't deny it. You see it everywhere. I guarantee you do. If you don't look higher, because eventually, no matter how long it takes, we all get promoted to a position of incompetence unless we find something we're good at, we find something we're satisfied with, and we stop chasing the next rung of the ladder. If you are doing a job that you enjoy and you're good at it, stay there. Don't abandon your post when things get hard. And I've seen people that will either quit and flee the other direction, or instead of quitting and fleeing and running to a different competitor or whatever you're doing, whatever field of business you're in, they'll just work really hard for a period of 2 or 3 months and try to get promoted into a different position so that they don't have to deal with the stresses of their current role. That makes no sense at all. If you think the stresses of your current role are too much, one that requires more responsibility above yours is going to be harder. And we always have this idea like what we deal with is harder than what our bosses deal with, or our whoever's in authority, whatever rulers, right? But because you don't see what goes on. You don't see what goes on behind closed doors in conversations and discussions, and you don't see the stress and the load they carry home, right? We just assume that bosses kick back and relax. Not always the case, unless they're incompetent. Then they're probably pretty chill until they get fired. But most of the time, that's not the case. Verse 8, he picks up this verse saying that whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Okay. And everybody I've seen, everywhere, digging into this and trying to understand, like, I've seen countless Bibles, I got tons of them, go to this section and it's like practical advice for life. That's how they like title it. And the little footnotes and the commentaries, they'll all say like these are completely unrelated topics. They're completely unrelated, but it's good advice, right? Careful about digging a pit, because you dig a pit for somebody else, disguise it, and then you can fall right into it yourself. I don't think these are unrelated ideas. And people will make this argument that Solomon has no flow of thought through these chapters. But he was the wisest man who ever lived. So is it that he didn't have a flow of thought when preaching this? Or is it that we're not thinking deep enough about it to understand his flow of thought? He was a very highly educated man. I doubt he was just rambling on. So as I dig into this more, and Solomon is known for some of his metaphors, right? He gets pretty metaphorical, and hence like the flies, dead flies and perfume giving it a bad smell, right? If we take that same approach here, what we're going to see, he says, whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. And it wasn't until I started digging into it and understanding the original Hebrew behind this that I came to the realization, I think, this is going to sound arrogant, I think everybody's wrong. He has a flow of thought here. But it's not about what you think it's about at face value. Hear me out. Hear me out. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones, right, digs out stones, may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. If a snake bites before it's charmed, the charmer receives no fee. And that verse made no sense. And I've seen it elsewhere. The charmer, snake charmer is of no advantage. The snake charmer gets no fee. This is the verse. And I'm going to go back and we'll dig into those other ones here in a second, but you have to understand this verse. If you understand this verse, the whole perspective shifts. King James nailed this one. And I do not say that often, because King James changed quite a bit of stuff when he had his Bible published. King James nailed the translation on this one almost 99% of the way there. The way the King James translates this verse, if a snake bites before it's charmed, the charmer receives no fee, they translated it as, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. Okay. In order to understand any of that, we need to understand a little bit of context here. If the serpent, and the word that we translate serpent, it's the same as Genesis was 3:1, where it's like in the serpent, was more cunning than any beast of the field. The serpent. He says, surely the serpent, not a snake, but the serpent, the viper. If he says, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, unless you take the time to charm it. And the word enchantment literally translates as whisper. So if you don't take the time to whisper and softly, speak softly, and softly charm the serpent, surely it'll bite. And he says that the babblers know better. Babbler. Well, what's a babbler? And I know what you're thinking. Well, somebody just babbles on and on and on. Babble, babble, like Babylon, right? Blah, 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 blah. No. That's what they thought it meant. But if you look at the original Hebrew word that we translate as babbler, well, King James translated as babbler, it means lord, ownership, someone who has dominion over something. But the primary translation of that word is husband. Yes! Ha! That makes so much more sense. Yes! Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment. And your husband's no better. We're no better. We're exactly the same. If you come at us with harsh tones, of course, we're going to bite. And that's a reaction. That's not a response that we want, but that's a reaction. And I struggle with that reaction myself. It took my wife and I many years to learn how to approach one another. You know, if things happened, if there's issues during the day, I'd get home from work, she'd get home from work, and we start immediately like approaching each other with like loud, harsh tones. I don't even hear what you just said. All I heard was the tone of the voice. Nope. And I'm biting her head off. Or vice versa, right? It took many years for us to get to the point of, okay, let's have a rule. First 5 minutes when we walk into a room, when we come together at the end of a day, no harsh words, no loud tones. Approach it softly. Let's settle in, put our stuff away. Relax, kind of, okay. Be able to focus. Doesn't help. We both have ADHD to begin with, so I can't. Get everything settled in. And then, okay, what happened? What needs my attention? What do I need to do or change or work on? Like, what happened? So, ladies, if you're listening, and your husband's this way, and he's always biting your head off, and you have no idea why, chances are you're not enchanting the serpent that you don't want to bite you anymore. In verse 10, Solomon says, if the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed. Yes, very, very true, right? You can't just constantly go around trying to hammer at things with a dull axe and expect to get any kind of work done to make any progress. But if the person wielding an axe takes a minute to wet the edge of it, right? To sharpen, to refine the edge that'll do the cutting, they can make a lot more progress, a lot more quickly. He says even with more strength, he's like, more strength will be required of using a dull axe, but skill will bring success. Not talking about chopping down wood. He's talking about having tough conversations. And in having these tough conversations, if we take the time necessary to pause and think and refine the words we're going to use to do the cutting, skill in that arena will bring success versus just beating at somebody with a dull axe and harsh words that don't get anywhere and don't make any progress. Helps to skillfully pick your words instead of approaching with the tone. And a lot of times, and you know, women get a bad rep for this because the women are the ones we say always say that, oh, it's not how you said it, or it's not what you said, it's how you said it. Men are just as bad for this. We just don't point it out. Like, nobody points out that guys are just as sensitive to the way things are said and the tone in which they're said than as women are. So if we're just as guilty of only hearing the tone, and the husband, the babblers, know better, then it would be wise to approach people with a level of softness. Calmness can lay great offenses to rest. This is what he was saying earlier. I don't think that this is a bunch of independent, unrelated, proverbial sayings that Solomon's just speaking for the heck of it, right? Like every commentator out there, or every Bible translation and all the footnotes. And I don't think Solomon was off his rocker at this point to where he couldn't have a connected thought. And for us to assume that, I think, is pretty ignorant on our end for the guy whose God-given gift was wisdom. I think this is more along the lines of marriage advice, relationship advice, which is what makes sense for a preacher to focus on, especially one towards the end of his life in his older years. You hear the same thing from older folks all the time who will tell you, based on wisdom, they've learned these life lessons along the way, and what they tell you inevitably in the end is that the only thing that matters is your relationship with other people. And if all the material things don't matter, all the positions and the prestige and everything you're chasing, none of that matters. But what actually matters is your relationship with other people. Solomon has a very connected thought through this entire chapter, and it's that other people, your relationships, your marriages, if you focus on what we've been studying up to this point, last couple of chapters, what was he talking about? Marriage. He hasn't stopped talking about it. We just think because it says chapter 10 that somehow that's changed. But if you remember, we're the ones who added these chapter subheadings, right? There was no chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. None of that was in the original text. It was literally just one long letter, one long book, one long scroll. He hasn't stopped talking about it. So this is where I think, they're all wrong. They're just missing the point. Like the majority of people who probably were listening to him going, yep, good advice, amen, preacher, yep, amen. Your average churchgoer. Amen to everything, hear and apply none of it. So if we know that he's referring to husbands in relationships, marriages, let's go back and revisit what he said that everyone says was just good advice. He who digs a pit, like whoever digs a pit, may fall into it. A pit, a trap, right? If you're trying to set a trap for somebody else, you may fall into that, right? So where it's good advice, you don't want to hurt yourself trying to hurt other people. In relationships, this takes on an entirely different connotation. Because in relationships, we get to a point sometimes where come hell or high water, it doesn't matter. We're going to try to harm that other person. We're going to get them back. We're going to make our point. The problem with that is in damaging our other half, it's kind of like, shooting the boat full of holes while we're still on it. There's no point in wrecking. It's kind of like I would never wish the president to do poorly in our country, regardless of who's in office, right? Because we're all on this boat together, and I don't want it to sink while I'm still on it. So I don't care. You don't want to take and harm the other part of you, because this is why God says that, Adam and Eve, when they're married, the two become one flesh, right? They become one. They become unified. So you might as well just harm yourself if you're going to try to harm the other person, because that's what you're doing, right? That's what he said in the previous chapters. You're shooting your own self in the foot. Don't dig a pit. Try to set a trap for somebody, especially in a relationship, and expect to get out of it unscathed. That's not going to happen. And he says, whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever breaks through a wall. The word wall here means hedge, fence, literally a wall. And he's given this idea of it was a well-known saying at the time. He kind of tweaked it a little bit. But the idea was, don't break down your neighbor's wall. He may have a snake over there that will bite you. this, in the context of a relationship, and it took me a few years to realize this. Things I wish people would have told me sooner. Some walls exist for a reason. And while part of us coming together as one in a marriage, in a relationship, and sharing all aspects of our lives together is breaking down walls and barriers that we have kind of erected over time as defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms in response to traumas we have faced in the past. I understand that. I understood that then. But I thought it was my job to break down every wall, to crash through every barrier, because I'm helping my wife, helping my partner in life. We're going to get through this together. We gotta undo all this damage. Some walls exist for a reason. I'll give you an example. A retaining wall, we all know this, retaining walls are important. They hold things back. Sometimes the walls, and just as guilty as I am, you see the same thing with women trying to, he's so guarded, and I need to break down that wall. I need to break through so he lets me in. It may not be, and please hear me, it may not be that wall exists to keep you out. The wall may exist to keep something else trapped in. And that's what I see with a lot of men, and this is the struggle they have in their relationships, is that they don't want to let their guard down. And a lot of that comes from trauma and coping and all that garbage that we bring into the relationship. And we have to sort that out together. But the problem with it is that if we try to break down all these walls all at once, it's not necessarily going to be a loving, wonderful experience once you break through the wall and get to the inside, right? You could get bit by a snake. And this idea that, if you're dismantling your neighbor's wall, and you kind of stick your hand through the wall to tear it down, that a viper would bite you. He's using this reference to a serpent, a viper, an adder, a snake, a few times now. And as I said before, what was Satan called in Genesis? How about in Revelation? The serpent, that great red dragon, Lucifer and Satan, right? This is what it says in Revelation. The serpent is representative of the devil. Now, understand devil means adversary, the enemy. So, same way evil means harm, Satan means adversary. Now, if that's what the serpent represents, then that tells me some walls exist not to keep you out, but to keep the devils locked in. Because as every man knows, we all have devils we fight. We all have demons we battle. And so do women. Ladies have them too. Some walls exist to guard our hearts against certain devils that we have fought for all our life. You don't want to tear all the walls down. And if you're in a relationship, sometimes the job is not to tear the walls down. Sometimes it's to, as God says in Isaiah, repair the breach where the walls started to break, to uphold one another, to bring each other closer together, to fortify the defenses versus tear down the walls and expose the heart to whatever was trapped inside. Isaiah 58:12 says, "And your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt, and you shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in," streets to live in. Some walls don't exist to be broken down. Sometimes they've already taken enough breaking. And the purpose we serve in a relationship is to repair the breach and restore the streets to live in, to dwell in, to make it safe again. Don't seek to destroy every wall you find. Inquire to find out why it's there. If you understand why it's there, then you can see if it needs to come down or needs to be built back up. Don't be so quick to tear the walls down. Now, he continues on saying, whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Digging stones. And I'm like, why do we dig stones? Do you actually know why? Like, what's the number one reason we quarry stones and dig up stones? Like rocks. Yeah, I've heard, go kick rocks. I'm like, is this like the Old Testament for go dig rocks? But the number one reason people, quarry stones, rock quarries, the whole purpose back then and today, it hasn't changed. Still, the number one purpose is for building, construction materials, building things, building foundations, building homes. The number one reason for quarrying stones was to build a home, to set the foundations. They also used stones to build altars. And then he says immediately after that, this is why people think they're not connected, that they're just random good advice, right? Oh, you can careful digging stones, dangerous job. Careful chopping wood, could get a splinter or chop your leg off if you don't know what you're doing. It's not what he's saying. He's saying whoever quarries stones may get injured by them. So if the number one reason for you digging up stones is to build a house, to build something, make sure you're building the right thing, or what you build, the home you build. If you're not building it correctly, if you're not quarrying the proper foundation, the proper stones, that thing you build might just destroy you. And then he says whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. Okay, endangered by the axe. I've done that. I've been there. Risk chopping a leg off, axe handle breaking and the axe head flying off, or my favorite is swing it down hard like this and it bounces up and hits you in the face. That's not good either. Endangered by the axe makes sense, but endangered by the split logs? How does that make sense? But in the context of a relationship, it does. Because what do people split wood for? Firewood, heat, right? Building materials, you split logs in order to have building materials. Again, coming back to this idea of if you're building a home, the wood may be part of the construction. The wood may be part of the comfort and the warmth and the heat. Or it could burn your house down. And I find it interesting because Baal was worshipped in pine groves and with trees, and all these ancient false idols, these false gods that you see in the Old Testament, all had this fascination with having idols made of wood. And we see wood come up a few times in the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? It's constantly coming back to wood. The first time you see wood in the Bible, right, it's in the garden, and Adam's introducing sin to the world, eating from a tree he shouldn't have been eating from. The next time you see wood have a prominent role in the story is Noah's Ark. And wood is what saves humanity from the Great Flood. And then you see, after that, it makes an appearance as, the Ark of the Covenant. Had to be made of wood overlaid with gold. But not made with stone overlaid with gold, right? And then that carried the law. But the law was death, right? So the law, that, because of Adam, the law brought just nothing but death. And then later on you see Jesus on a cross made of wood. Finally putting back the first fruits of God, as Peter calls it, back onto the tree. Putting Jesus onto the tree, onto the cross. And he offered that sacrifice for once and for all of mankind, past, present, and future. For whoever believes in Jesus, his sins are forgiven. That tree brought life, not death. Wood had a starring role throughout the entire Bible, and I had no idea until I started looking at it because of what Solomon said here. All throughout the Old Testament, all the prophets of Baal and everything, they built their idols out of wood. They sacrificed on stone altars to these false gods that had no breath in them, could not save them. And at the end of the day, what you do with the stones you dig and with the wood you split, whether you use it to sacrifice to false gods, whether you use it to worship the wrong gods, and you deny the existence of the one and only true God, yeah, you can be endangered by it. It endangers your life if you're building a home on the wrong foundation and the wood you split, if it's not to warm the home, to keep the comfort, to provide for your family, then it very well may just burn your house down. This is all logical advice, sure, but it follows a clear line of thought from Solomon about men. How do you build your home? In verse 12, he says, words from the mouth of the wise are gracious, but fools are consumed by their own lips. So words from the mouth of a wise person. If you want to identify who is wise, if you can't necessarily smell their character, as he's saying in verse 1, then the words of the wise are gracious, full of grace, forgiveness, patience, long-suffering. If you're talking to somebody and the words coming out of their mouth are not full of grace, but gossip, probably not a wise person, probably a fool. You'd be careful to, you'd be correct to guard your heart against a fool like that. And he says, but fools are consumed with their own lips. They're consumed, like literally they destroy themselves. They eat themselves with their own mouth, right in their mouth, saying things they shouldn't say. Ends up being their undoing. Facts. That one doesn't even need any explanation. If people would learn to shut up sooner, things would go a lot smoother for a lot of people. Things that aren't a problem become a problem because we keep running our mouth when we shouldn't. Took me years to learn that. Still trying to learn it. He says, at the beginning, their words are folly, right? Foolishness. So a fool, at the beginning, their words are folly. But at the end, they are wicked madness. Understand what he's saying by folly here. Blah, 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 get the gift. Understand what he's saying by folly. Their words are full of folly. It had this connotation of being morally empty, devoid of any kind of integrity. So when he says when they start speaking, you want to find out and point out an idiot? Their words that they start speaking have no moral compass to them, no moral character. And by the end, wicked madness, literally evil madness, harmful insanity. The more they speak, the more riled up they get, and they're not making any sense. He says, and fools multiply words. Fools multiply words. Literally, fools are full of many words. Where one word will do, yes, no, they use many. Think of this as your stereotypical politician's answer to everything. Will you raise taxes? Well, there's a lot of things you must consider before you really get into it. They multiply words. It's yes or no question. Fools multiply words. This is why Jesus said, let your yea be yea, right? Let your yes be yes, your no be no. Don't swear. Don't give an oath. Just yes or no. Fools multiply words. He says, no one knows what is coming. Who can tell someone else what will happen after them? He said, I asked this question before. No one, right? Because he's the wisest man who ever lived. No, I can't tell you. So no one can tell you what's coming. So don't listen to the fool who has all the conspiracy theories figured out and believes they know exactly what's coming. Nobody knows what's coming. No matter how much they try and tell you, no matter how much they try and convince you the world will end in 2055 or whatever the new conspiracy theory is, nobody knows. And if they claim to know, they're an idiot. They're a fool. That's what Solomon is saying. And he was right back then. He's right now. It's like the ozone, man. And I'm a scientist, okay? I'm a trained neurobiologist. I watched as like the ozone, like I was growing up and being trained as a scientist, like graduating high school, right when the ozone really started to like become a discovery. A whole new ozone layer. We got to fix a whole new ozone layer. And then I'm in college, and the whole new ozone layer is gone. I'm like, yeah, it didn't make sense to me how you can have a hole in something gaseous. That doesn't make sense at all. Must have been a fool with many words. Confused a lot of people. All to self-serve their own needs. This is what you typically see in politics. This is why you don't trust anything you hear in politics. Do your own research. I don't care who you are. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. If you start seeing a bunch of stuff from a right-wing organization or a left-wing organization claiming something about a bill or a law that they're trying to pass, don't take their word for it. Read it. I started doing that and lost all faith in politics. Entirely. Because it's all lies and deception. All of it. All of it. Verse 15, he says, the toil of fools wearies them. They do not know the way to town. I like this also, I think it's King James says, like, they don't even know the way to the city, right? Their toil, their work, their labor wearies them. They don't even know the way to the city. The whole point that Solomon is saying is that because they multiply words, and when things can just be straightforward and simple, quick answers, quick solutions, quick and dirty, get it done. Because they can't do that without multiplying words and dragging things out and making things a big long procession, their work is exhausting. The reason they can't even find, now understand, the way to the city would have been the biggest road, because it has the most traffic, going up to the biggest gate that everyone can see. He's saying they can't even find their way into the city, right? You can see it. It's right there. But they can't get from here to there because the way they're working through things is freaking exhausting. There's no way that you would trust them to give you directions if they don't have a sense of direction themselves. And yet that's what we do. We trust these people to give us advice and direction. And they can't find their way to the biggest gate on the biggest road straight into the city where everyone else can. Everyone else can get there with no problem. But their work, their toil is exhausting. In verse 16, he says, woe to the land whose king was a servant. Now, this is, NIV says servant, but they include a footnote here with what the other translation of that word means, which the other translations use, and it's technically more accurate. Instead of saying servant, it means child. Woe to the land whose king was a child, and whose princes feast in the morning. Now, Solomon was young when he became king. But the difference is he asked God for wisdom to be able to discern between right and wrong to better lead God's people. God's answer to that was wisdom. This isn't referring to age. And this is why the translations kind of flip-flop back and forth between, does it mean servant? Does it mean child? Like, what's this? What was he saying? It doesn't mean old versus young. It has to do with emotional maturity. So yeah, woe to a land whose king acts like a child, is only concerned about what he wants and not what the people want. And whose princes, these people who are supposed to be governors, rulers and authority over their districts, they feast in the morning when they should be getting down to business. There's a proper order to everything, right? There should be a time and a place for everything, is what he was saying in previous chapters. If they're feasting in the morning, they would get drunk at feasts. It's 5 o'clock somewhere and it starts at 8 a.m. That's not a good nation to be a part of. He's like, woe to the land that has to deal with that, because it's childish, it's immature. And then he goes on saying, blessed is the land whose king is of noble birth. So what do you have, a child or one of noble birth? And again, this is nobility. He's referring to nobility. It's a reference to wisdom. It carries a connotation of doing the right thing. Like, oh, that's a noble cause. That's what the word means, right? So of noble birth, meaning like you focus on what is noble, right, morally correct, and trying to help lead people for people's sake, not your own. And if you're doing that, blessed is that land, right? Now, the word blessed or blessed, we screw this up in churches all the time. This just drives me nuts. The word blessed, you read the Beatitudes when Jesus is saying, blessed is he who does, and it goes on and on and on. The word blessed means happy. That's it. Happy is he who does this. Happy is he who does that. Happy is the land whose king is of noble birth. Noble birth, literally, it's nobility, or honor and dignity and integrity and character, moral fortitude. That's a happy nation if you're being led by a good leader. And whose princes eat at a proper time. So not only is the leader good, but the people reporting up under him are doing their jobs correctly too. That is a blessed and happy nation, when everybody's just simply doing the jobs that they were supposed to be doing. So they feast at the proper time, right? They eat at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness, right? They eat because that's what gives you strength to get another day's work in, not so that you can just get wasted. If that's your idea of leadership, it'll be short-lived. Somebody will make sure of it. We see that throughout the Old Testament multiple times. Verse 18, I immediately tied back to verse 11. Now follow me. Hear me out on this one. Through laziness. So he just got done talking about like what proper leadership looks like on like a nationwide scale. And I guarantee you everybody's in agreement. A good leader does the job, serves the people that he leads, and not himself. If they do that, everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's a happy nation. It's a blessed nation. And he just finishes saying this. And he goes in saying, through laziness, the rafters sag. Because of idle hands, the house leaks. Through laziness, the rafters sag. Because if the rafter, if the roof gets a hole in it and starts to leak, not repairing that hole is laziness. Speaking of which, I have a hole in my roof I need to fix. Forgot about that. Laziness! That's probably why I tied it back to verse 11. God telling me, fix your house. Fix your leaky roof. If you're not willing to get up and repair the breach that's causing your shelter to fail, and now rain's coming through, the rain will get into the wood that you split in building it. It'll rot the wood. And he says, yeah, that's because of laziness and idle hands. So if the reason why your rafters begin to sag and the shelter that you're providing as a husband and a father and a leader of your home starts to crumble around you and sag, if you don't repair that, it will implode on you. It will crumble. And the sad part of it is poor leadership in the home on the father's end results in a lot of destroyed lives. Solomon was onto a very deep point here, and I don't think we give him credit for it. The same way that we expect a leader to properly lead our nation, out of purely selfless interests, seeking to serve the people he leads and not himself. To do what's best for the people and not himself, and take care of the people and not himself first. Solomon's saying the same should be expected of you as a father and a husband in your home. So are you the spiritual leader in your home? Are you providing for the needs of your family? Sure, material needs, actual shelter, food, shelter, water, the basic needs on Maslow's hierarchy. But there's more than that, right? So are you taking care of the emotional needs in your home? Or are you lazy and idle? If you're not doing what you are called to do, and men understand this, it is a calling of God to be a father and a leader of your home. And if you're not willing to step up and do the job, your house will fall and crumble around you and destroy the lives in it along the way. Make sure that the needs of the people you lead are taken care of before your own. This is something that I feel personally. So when we were younger and struggling to make ends meet, a lot more than we are now, right? Because I was new in my career. And I remember I had big battles I would have. Like my wife and I would have big arguments. And it would come down to, I'd find out, like, what do you mean? Like, I've got 3 daughters now, right? So early on, I'd find out, like, they needed something and I wasn't aware of the fact that they needed that. And my wife's like, well, we don't have the money for that right now. We'll have to get that later. I'm like, no. I have no problem telling my children no out of principle, but I won't tell my children no out of poverty. I will find a way. My kids, their needs will be taken care of. Regardless of what else happens and at whatever costs, I will make sure that their needs are taken care of. Because to me, that's what fatherhood means. And I had a great father, and he set that example for me. So, thanks, Dad. Oh, and happy birthday. His birthday's coming up. So, but a lot of men don't have, like a lot of boys growing up don't have that example to kind of go off of. So, they have to learn the hard way. And sometimes it takes a marriage or 2 or 3 before they start to realize, like, I don't know what it means to properly lead a home or to properly lead my family. And this is something that we all struggle with at some point, one point or another. And I understand this is primarily for the men on this chapter of Ecclesiastes, I guess. But I think it's practical everywhere, right? So we each have roles that we're required to uphold and do. In doing our part, if everyone does their part, blessed is that nation, blessed is that house. He says, a feast is made for laughter, wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything. ESV, I like the way they translate this as, but money is the answer for everything, which is more accurate to what Solomon was saying. Feast is made for laughter, for societal obligations, friends, it's great, everyone has a fun time, everyone's laughing. But if there's no money, there's no feast. If there's no money, there's no laughter. Wine makes sense. Wine makes life merry. Unless the whole reason you're drinking is because you're depressed, because there's no money. Solomon's pointing out this fact too. As much as a nation needs to serve its people's interest first, that starts with making sure people have the basic necessities taken care of. Making sure that they have the money they need. That you have led your nation in a way, or led your home in a way, that put finances at a point of focus. Smart decisions when it came to finances and utilizing your resources for the right things. Making sure that you take care of the leaky roof before you go out and purchase something for yourself. Doing that is foolish. It's wise to take care of the things that you have to take care of. And as a king, it's necessary to build a good economy, because people are not going to be laughing if they're too stressed out because they can't pay bills. You know, feasts are great, but feasts don't put clothes on the backs of your children. Wine is great, it makes life merry, but it's very difficult to be happy if you can't go to the doctor because you don't have health insurance, because you just choose not to get health insurance. These things I've seen so many people struggle with, and it comes to setting priorities. Get these basic things taken care of, then have fun. Then buy things for yourself too, but make sure that your family is taken care of first. Money answers everything. It's the universal conduit to where work gets done for money. You purchase whatever you need with money. The basic needs are taken care of with money. Now, I'm not saying money solves everything. That's a different conversation entirely. Money's simply a tool, but without the proper tools, you cannot build a home. So focus on setting financial responsibility as a focal point. And he says in verse 20, it seems to take a complete shift. And he says, do not revile the king, even in your thoughts. Like, don't hate the king, even if you're only thinking it. Or curse the rich in your bedroom. Right? Don't even, in the privacy of behind closed doors, don't even curse those people who you think are rich. Or the king, don't hate him. That's focusing all entirely on the wrong thing. Because a bird in the sky may carry your words, and a bird on the wing may report what you say. Right? There's always the risk that whatever you say will get out. And if it gets out, don't say anything that you wouldn't say to somebody's face. Because you don't know what burden they're carrying. Don't hate the king. You don't know what he's dealing with. And at the same time, don't hate the rich, because you couldn't make it a focus in your own life to take care of your house and your finances and your family. So step up, men. And I'll see you guys next week. I love you.